dust lifted at the ranger's boots and showed a small body, an elephant calf crawling from the thorn edge, trunk dragging as if the ground were heavy. He stopped and set his forehead to the earth. Ribs stood like narrow bows under dull hide. He gathered his legs, tried to stand, and folded again, ears trembling against grit. The ranger went to one knee but did not reach for him. The calf had seen him. The eyes held to the boots as if choosing nearness. A dry wind moved the grass and carried the sour tang of cracked skin and hunger. He waited in stillness. The calf's breaths were short and fast. The trunk tip curled toward the ranger and failed halfway. He tried again, but it was a crawl, not a rise. Forelegs splayed, hind legs sliding, belly drawing a thin line in dust. He stopped within the ranger's shadow and kept his head lifted, eyes wavering as if light itself were hard to hold. The ranger tilted a bottle and let a thread of water darken the ground a short step away. "Easy, little one," he whispered. The trunk found the damp patch and pressed, then smeared mud along the tongue. The calf did not gulp. He gathered moisture a little at a time, pausing between swallows as if each one must be paid for. Two other rangers made a soft perimeter. One tied canvas between thorns so the shade widened without flapping. The other watched for movement, hyena, jackal, and slow vulture circles that might mistake this for an ending. The calf shifted. Ears flicked dust. Each breath rattled, a dry drum in a small chest. He rose a handspan, swayed, and settled with a sigh more air than sound. The ranger slid the water's shine closer but kept the rhythm deliberate. Too much at once can snap a thin line of survival. The ground nearby carried layered prints. In a sand patch, a confusion of small tracks looped and doubled back around thorns and mounds without a steady companion trail. No fresh mark from a mother. Farther out, large pads softened into nothing. Between those loops, a run of hyena tracks cut through like stitches that never closed. The ranger let this pass across his face without change. He wet a strip of cloth and laid it near the trunk, not touching. The trunk searched, gripped, squeezed until a brown line streaked the hide. A faint vibration trembled the dust, a rumble too small to be a call, more like a body remembering where sound begins. The tail switched to keep pace with breath. They set a wider shade with canvas, rope, and a low branch, easing it until shadow slipped over the calf's eyes without a hard edge. The truck stayed quiet, doors open, supplies visible but not looming. The ranger mixed an electrolyte solution in a small bottle with a rubber teat, waited for the heat to leave the liquid, then knelt. He inched the teat to the dust, a hand's length from the mouth. The trunk tested it, withdrew, returned. Lips curled, released, curled again. A small swallow traveled the throat. The calf paused as if surprised by the work. The ranger waited for the second swallow before offering the third, counting by breath instead of numbers. He offered only what could be accepted, as if patience were shelter. Light softened. Flies drifted and dropped their interest. Between sips, the calf closed his eyes, opened them slowly, held the ranger's hands for a heartbeat, then let the focus slide away. When wind touched the canvas, he flinched, then stilled until the fabric settled. A scout returned with quiet news. Faint dung dry enough to crumble, no fresh browsing on nearby acacias. The loops of small tracks faded into scrub as if the ground had lost interest. The ranger nodded and shifted his knee off a stone. Dust coated his boot. The calf's ears lifted and settled, like a signal that had not yet found its answer. After a steady run of swallows, the bottle was half lighter. He traded the wet patch for a shallow pan of water, metal warmed to the air and set low. He kept it at the rim of reach rather than under the mouth, asking the trunk to travel the last few inches. The calf reached, misjudged, reached again. This time the trunk tip rested on the cool rim and stayed there, not drinking yet, simply taking the steadiness of something near. The ranger let the moment hold. He knew these small gains, a pause that was not collapse, a breath that finished steady. He studied the flanks. With each breath the belly lifted a little higher from dust before settling again. The spine showed its beads, yet the breaths were deeper. When a beetle flipped beside his cheek, the calf fluttered his ear and settled without a startle. The ranger moved the pan a fraction closer. The trunk followed and dipped. Drops moved in, then another. He kept count by watching for the blink and the small exhale that meant the swallow went down. Twilight spread a pale color over the flats. The team set a rope in a wide arc that guided without trapping and stepped back. Notes were spoken and kept as memory. First approach to shade, First controlled swallows. First leaned toward water. The calf gathered his legs once more. This time the hindquarters came under him in a trembling crouch. The forelegs braced, the body rocked, the nose reached toward the pan, and he stood halfway before sliding down. The sound he made was a sigh that held no surrender. Effort remained in the muscles like a kept promise. The ranger leaned back to give space, knowing even breath can weigh too much if held too near. "Stay with me," he said, the second and last thing he would speak, quiet as a hand laid on water. It was not a command. It was an invitation to choose another minute. Night leaned from the ridge. A thin crescent rose. The calf shifted closer to the ranger's knee, near without touching, as if the air between them had become a place he could use. The trunk tip dangled over the pan's edge. The eyes half closed, then opened to fix on small, steady things. Pan, rope line, boots, canvas. Seam insects lifted their chorus. Hyena voices did not answer. The perimeter held. The calf's sides rose and fell in slower measure. Saliva gathered and was licked away without hurry. As darkness gathered, the canvas earned its work. Ear veins no longer burned. The trunk rested across a foreleg, a loop loosened from effort. The ranger felt a line inside his chest unclench and kept his face plain. He had stood through nights where hope looked like this and did not last. He answered that memory by checking the rope and turning the pan so its rim faced the trunk. The calf slept in brief stretches, waking to shift and breathe deeper. When the last color folded from the sky, the calf's belly lifted a touch more with each breath. He did not cry out. He did not call. The body chose quiet, and the men answered with the same. Dust cooled. Stars took their places without fuss. The land held them without hurry, as if darkness understood that the first step toward survival was not movement at all, but the decision to remain. Shade stretched from thorn to thorn, a canvas lifted with rope and patience, pulled taut enough to hold but not flap. Beneath it, the light softened, the heat fell away by a degree, and in that margin of comfort the calf's body eased just slightly. His chest rose in short, uneven pulses, the sound of air moving through a dry reed. His trunk rested across one foreleg, curled without intent. The ranger knelt nearby, mixing a careful solution, clean water and the powder that steadied salt and sugar in the blood. It was not a cure, only a way of holding life steady while the body decided whether it could go on. He offered the bottle at the edge of reach, not under the mouth. The calf's trunk lifted weakly, tested, then withdrew. Another minute passed before it reached again, brushed the rubber teat, and rapped with what strength remained. The first sip was slow. Liquid slipped into the throat, and the calf shuddered as if startled by the sensation. He paused, exhaled, then tried again. This second swallow moved more smoothly, though his ears flicked once, a faint gesture that looked more like a memory of comfort than an action born of strength. The rangers worked without speaking much. One dampened a strip of cloth in a basin and laid it across the calf's back, not pressing, only letting cool seep through hide cracked with thirst. Another kept watch on the open flats, eyes moving across the rim of scrub and grass where scavengers might gather if weakness carried too far. Their movements were slow by intent, nothing rushed, nothing startling, as though the air itself must not be disturbed too sharply around the fragile rhythm of the calf's breath. Every now and then a sound rose from the small body. It was not a trumpet, not even the beginnings of one. More a vibration, thin and uncertain, that trembled through the dust without carrying distance. The ranger closest leaned slightly forward, listening, but did not answer, with words. The sound came once, then faded, like a question never fully asked. Only the tail moved in reply, twitching in small bursts as if to insist the body was still here. Scouts moved outward, following what the ground remembered. Tracks lay scattered across dry soil, some crisp, some half erased by wind. The story they told was not of migration or steady travel, but of circles and confusion. Small pads, the size of the calf's, wandered in loops around thorn clumps and broken termite mounds. There was no broad line of a herd, no deep depressions from heavier bodies leading onward. Instead, the smaller prints tangled back on themselves, as if searching without finding. Among them, fresh scars marked where hyena paws had cut through, crossing at angles, their claw tips sharp in the earth. The scouts exchanged quiet glances but said little. What mattered was that the calf had not fallen alone. He had searched. He had been searching until searching became collapse. Back beneath the canvas, the calf shifted again. The trunk pressed more firmly to the bottle, and he managed a run of swallows before tiring. His head lowered abruptly to the dust, eyes closing for a long moment, then opening halfway as if unwilling to let go of the nearness of others. A ranger whispered, "That's it, little one," and drew the bottle back only once the trunk slid away on its own. It was better to leave a want than to risk too much too soon. The calf's breathing steadied into a slower pattern, each exhale marked by a soft rattle at the end. The cloth was re-wet and placed across his flank this time, and a second piece was laid near the ears, where vessels pulsed faintly beneath thin skin. Flies buzzed and circled but were brushed away before they could settle long. The calf's ears flicked again, a tired motion, but still a response. When a beetle skittered across his foreleg, the trunk twitched in reflex, sweeping it aside without lifting. Small instincts lingered, even when strength did not. As the sun bent lower, a shadow reached further under the canvas. The scouts returned with their report: no fresh dung, no broken branches from grazing, no signs of other elephants in a day's distance. The ranger absorbed this without outward change. He poured a thin line of water into a shallow pan, set it a few inches closer, and then leaned back to give the calf the choice. After a long wait, the trunk stirred, reached, and dipped into the pan. Drops slipped into the mouth. The calf coughed once, shook his head faintly, then tried again. This time he swallowed without pause. Patience shaped the hours. The men measured success not in strength regained, but in small motions. The way the calf's eyes lingered open longer between rests, the way the tail twitched more often, the way the ears lifted when cloth was laid across his back. Each act was written down in silence, not with ink, but in the still attention of those who understood that memory might be all that remained. Evening insects began their chorus, high and thin, filling the air with a tremble. The calf shifted closer to the basin, not by standing, but by crawling a handspan forward. Dust streaked his hide, but determination lay in the movement. He stopped when the pan touched his trunk tip, then exhaled into the water before drinking again. This was no triumph, it was a fragile balance, a body choosing not to yield yet. Still, the rangers marked it as a turn. Sometimes survival began with the smallest claim to place. One ranger adjusted the rope perimeter, making sure its arc held wide and unthreatening. Another carried dung from the fire line to spread a scent that discouraged predators. Nothing loud, nothing sharp, only the slow building of a circle in which weakness could rest unseen. Above them, the sky began to pale at the edge with the first thought of dusk. Stars would arrive soon, steady and unconcerned. But for now, the light was enough to show the calf's chest lifting a little fuller with each breath. The ranger poured the last of the solution into the pan, diluted now to keep balance. He did not urge the calf forward. The trunk found it anyway, wrapped around the rim, and drew a steady drink. The sound was soft, unremarkable, but to those who listened it was as profound as any call across distance. When he finished, the calf let the trunk drop back to the earth and rested. His eyes half closed, then opened again, not fully alert, but unwilling to let darkness take the moment too soon. They stayed near him until the night deepened, each man taking his turn at the quiet vigil. Hyena laughter carried far off but did not come closer. Within the rope line, the calf twitched his tail once more and rumbled faintly, the sound thinner than it should have been but clear in intent. The ranger closest looked up at the stars as if to measure the distance such a sound could travel. He did not answer with words. Instead, he sat in silence, keeping the shade and the stillness as a promise. And in that fragile quiet, the calf breathed, lived, and waited for whatever might come next. Day slid across the flats with the thin heat eased by the canvas, and the calf dozed in short pieces, waking to touch the pan with his trunk. The rangers kept the perimeter, moving only when the shade shifted, their steps slow as if any sudden motion might shake the fragile balance held all day. By late afternoon he had taken small drinks without coughing. His ears flicked more often, almost rhythmically, as if the body were testing comfort. Evening gathered. Insects braided a hum above the rope until it became a single thread tying scrub to sky. The calf's chest rose in a steadier count. When the nearest ranger nudged his boot, the trunk lifted and hung in the air, tasting distance. He set another inch of diluted electrolyte in the pan, slid the bowl a thumb's width, and withdrew. The calf found it with the slow certainty of relearning and drank, pausing, between swallows to make room for the effort. A faint west wind slipped under the canvas, cooling it and easing heat from the thin vessels in the ears. A bird called once far off, a simple note without echo. The watchers shifted places without breaking the quiet, one on the ridge, one near the truck, one kneeling between shade and open ground. Dry leaves loosened and fell from the hide. He blinked against grit and did not flinch when the canvas settled. Toward dusk, amber light made distance look closer than it was. The calf drew his legs under himself by inches. He did not stand. He gathered. A tremor passed along his spine and eased. Then his ribcage expanded as if breath had reached farther down than it had all day. The nearest ranger held his breath without meaning to. The calf held, and let out a note that sank into the ground beneath him. It was low and round, a sound that made dust quiver at the pan's edge. It rolled a few body lengths and disappeared into grass, felt more than heard, a weight that moved through bone. The ranger's fingers loosened against his knee. He did not speak. The calf's ears opened wider, then settled. A long pause followed. Insects filled it. Wind unstitched it. The sound might have ended there. Far off, beyond a thorn ridge faded like a memory of shade, an answer came. One steady rumble, deeper, stretched long enough to be certain, then gone. It did not rush closer. It did not repeat. It laid itself across the flats like a hand and withdrew, leaving silence shaped to its size. No one moved. "Let him answer first," the kneeling man whispered. They stepped 2 paces back without removing presence. The rope stayed, a soft boundary that could be parted without ceremony. The ridge watcher set one knee to the sand and closed his eyes to keep his body from intruding on what the land was doing. The calf's trunk hovered. His chest swelled again, held longer, and sent a second note, thin at the edges but crossing the small space between breath and earth. Silence returned. The last flies spiraled and settled. An owl lifted from a stump and went away, unbothered. The calf waited, ears half spread. The rangers measured seconds by the falling light on the canvas seam. When the answer came again, it was not closer or louder, but steadier. The west wind laid it along the grass. It lasted a heartbeat longer than before. The calf edged forward until his forehead nearly touched the pan. He did not drink. His trunk moved as if counting the space between calls. The ranger placed a wet cloth within reach and drew his hand away. The calf ignored it. He kept still. Ribs rose. He sent a third note, smaller yet, and rested with eyes half closed. The answer did not come for a while. When it did, it carried a patient, level shade, refusing to rush the gap. They let dusk deepen without lanterns. They moved nothing except their breath. Scents shift with evening. A sudden brightness can grind its own line across a path. Sound is trying to open. Hyena laughter rippled from the east and fell away. The calf twitched his tail and stilled. He seemed to listen with his skin. When he finally reached for the pan again, it felt less like thirst and more like marking time between efforts. Small swallows went down. He lifted his head as if testing whether standing could be part of this exchange. His legs gathered but did not rise. The ranger felt the pull to help and resisted. Support placed too early teaches leaning, not balance. The calf needed his own rhythm to find him. Out on the flats, the answering voice sounded again, faint as if bent by distance or terrain. Its steadiness did not waver. The rangers offered no theories. They had seen bulls call and cows answer, mothers search and calves respond, and sometimes strangers hold a tone long enough for the lost to feel the shape of being found. The truth of it was not in names, but in the care taken by the sound to be reliable. Dark rose from the ground until it held them all. The rope blended with shadow. The canvas became a darker piece of sky. The calf sent nothing more for a long span. He breathed. He watched. He kept his trunk lifted a little as if the air in front of him were worth holding. A bat flickered near the line and was gone. The ridge watcher stood, shook out numbness, and settled again. Patience turned into work. They changed the cloth once, cooled the pan, and smoothed the dust by the calf's cheek. Above the flats, stars took their places. In that plain company the calf let out one more rumble, a thread barely there. It was not answered, not at first. Long minutes moved. Distant laughter faded. A quiet fell so complete a pulse could be heard if a thumb pressed a wrist. Then the reply came, far and steady, not ashamed to be gentle. It held a message no one could translate. The calf's eyes opened wider, then softened. He did not call back. He did not need to. The answer remained in the air as presence, not instruction. The ranger near the pan set the bottle aside and put both hands flat in the dust, grounding himself to the same plane that carried the exchange. Night took the flats. The wind turned cool enough that the men drew sleeves over their forearms. The calf laid his head to earth and rested the trunk along it, a line of warmth on grit. His breath evened to a count they could predict. Nothing had arrived, nothing a ledger could record. Yet the moment had shifted. The circle they had made now felt like part of a larger one beyond sight. A last glow edged the acacias, enough to pick out the calf's outline, ears laid flatter, one foot curled under his belly, a shape that promised the possibility of standing tomorrow. The men stayed and did not speak. A jackal barked once and left the field to deeper night. Somewhere a slow step moved, or maybe it was only wind and thorn. They did not chase meaning. They kept the shade, the water, the cloth, and the distance that let sound travel, unbroken, and waited with him as dark settled cleanly over the land. First light cooled the dust and lifted the smell of wet cloth. Under the canvas the calf stirred, his trunk testing the air, breath even in small counts. One foreleg tucked under his chest as if the body had remembered a beginning. A ranger loosened the rope so shade could drift. From the western brush a shape slipped out the way water leaves shadow. She came one measured step at a time, testing the wind, head low, tusks short and scarred. The left ear showed a torn crescent, the right carried a seam of old damage. Her belly told its own news, the weight and sway of milk. She paused and blew dust in a soft burst that fell back on itself. Nothing said hurry. Everything said intention. The nearest ranger lifted a palm and stepped back. The rope was dropped at one end so it read as suggestion, not fence. The calf lifted his ears and stilled. He did not try to stand. He watched her as if the space between them had become something he could use. She crossed the open with contained calm. At the mouth of shade she halted and waited. Her trunk rose, brushed the canvas lightly, and hovered above the calf's brow. She did not touch yet. She breathed, long and even, and let that breath fall over him. The dust at his cheek trembled. He gathered his legs and managed only a slide, bringing his forehead to the ground near her feet. The tip of her trunk rested between his eyes, neither pushing nor pulling, an acknowledgment shaped in weight and warmth. The ranger checked the urge to step closer and let the moment arrange itself. "Easy, girl," he whispered, and the words went no farther than his sleeve. She shifted a fraction and offered her flank, angling her body to make a low hollow in shade. Milk scent slipped into the air like a memory bodies carry without being taught. The calf lifted his head, reached, missed, reached again. His trunk traced along rough skin until it found the warm, hairless swell and pressed there without skill. She stood without flinch or correction, a place to set effort against. After a long moment the mouth found the teat, failed, found again, then sealed with a small determined pull. He did not drink in a rush. He drew little, paused, and tried again, learning the rhythm as it formed beneath his jaw. A line of milk slicked the corner of his mouth and vanished in dust. She widened her stance by inches, lowering herself by certainty rather than bend, placing steadiness where it would meet him. Her tail swatted once and stilled. The torn ear opened and closed, a slow bellows moving air over them both. The rangers stepped farther back, making a wider circle that belonged to neither rope nor canvas. Two hyenas lifted from grass and froze at her outline. A low rumble moved through her chest, more vibration than sound, and the grass closed over them. The calf's legs worked in small, uncoordinated bursts. Hindquarters tucked and slid. Front feet scraped, for purchase. She kept the space still. Then his forelegs locked for half a breath and the head rose so he no longer leaned on his own trunk. The pull of his mouth grew stronger. Swallowing found a quiet pattern beneath the canvas. It was not his mother. His eyes searched the wrong side for a familiar mark. No recognition answered. No old call tied them. There was only her milk and his need, meeting without negotiation, rare under herd cover, rarer in open flats. She leaned her forehead to his for 2 breaths, then lifted away, leaving heat like a laid cloth. He drank again, longer now, the muscles in his cheeks smoothing from clenched to working. From time to time she touched the ground near his feet with the tip of her trunk, reading what dust keeps, the age of his track, the weight of his last fall. When he rested, the mouth slipped free and his cheek settled against her belly. She stood and made no claim. The ranger exhaled, glanced at the line of sky, and drew the canvas back a span so Shade would travel. "Take your time," he said, the second and last thing offered, and closed his hands. After the pause, he tried to stand. He gathered his legs, rocked once, twice, and rose to a crooked height. His knees wobbled. He widened his stance the way small ones do when balance is a lesson. She matched him with a sidestep that put her in the place he would fall if he fell. He leaned into her and took 3 steady swallows before letting his weight sag. Light opened and insects changed pitch. The scouts retreated a few paces and stood in their own shadows. No one reached for the calf. This was not a moment to track. It was a moment to trust for as long as it chose to last. Milk dried to a pale line along his jaw. A drop hung at the end of his trunk and fell. She lifted her head and looked past the men as if testing how far quiet could stretch without breaking. He studied the place where her foreleg met her chest, memorizing a new map. When he tried again, he stood less shakily and took his weight on all fours. She angled herself so the smooth swell of her gland matched his reach, not forcing, only aligning. He nursed without urgency, then pulled back and breathed long and even, the first breath that sounded like belonging to the day instead of to survival alone. The men eased the canvas a little, not away, just enough to keep Shade where it was needed. They moved the pan to the edge of her shadow, and when his trunk wandered that way, he found water and took it without coughing. She watched him drink as if the act confirmed something already decided in quiet brush. By mid-morning, the flats carried 2 kinds of prints where there had been one. Small and larger, overlapping in places and running side by side in others, yesterday's loops crossing the fresh straightness of now. Vultures that had hung early drifted higher and away. They stayed like that, she steady as chosen shade, he sleeping in short fits and waking to feed, through the tilt toward noon. A few rumbles passed between them, one from her chest, one from his belly that sounded like comfort learned. Grass ticked in the wind. In that ordinary light the rare thing continued. A small life anchoring itself to a body with room to hold it. When the heat gathered again they moved a little, not far, just enough that her shadow fell where his legs could rest. He followed close, placing his feet in the shallow hollows her steps left. He walked the length of her side until the 2 of them stood as one form under the hanging seam of canvas. The rangers stepped back another measure and watched dust settle in slow spirals, grateful for a quiet that needed nothing from them but distance and care. Night passed in soft fragments, the kind that gather not in hours but in breaths, small sounds, half-steps, and stillnesses between. The calf stirred often, never fully rising, but never going still long enough to worry the men who took turns keeping watch. Once, just before midnight, he let out a long sigh that ended in a light rumble. The female answered with no sound at all, only a shift in her weight that brought her flank closer, her shadow deeper over his spine. Insects kept to the edges of the canvas. Somewhere distant, a jackal barked and was answered, but neither call pressed close. The rope perimeter needed no mending. The space they had made together, the rangers, the shade, the quiet, held. What had entered that space chose to stay. The calf drank in the early hours without effort, without coaxing. Not urgently, either, just enough to keep the body turning forward. Each time he did, she lowered her head and held it near his shoulder until he was finished, then rose again and resumed stillness. The ritual became familiar. When he collapsed again beside her, it was not out of loss. It was out of rest. By the time the horizon paled, his breaths had lengthened. His tail flicked with more rhythm. A small pile of dung behind him was soft, but not dry, a sign they all knew to read. The female had not shifted more than a few meters all night, and yet the ground around her feet had been rearranged, not by pace, but by presence, by choosing to stay when she might have left. The rangers whispered to one another as they prepared to open the rope line. No signal was given, just a glance, a nod, and hands working to unloop the line nearest the flats. The canvas was loosened at one end to let in more morning. Dew clung to its seam before dropping onto soil that no longer baked. The calf stood slowly, rocking a little, then straightening. He didn't fall. He adjusted, bracing wider. His head rose. His trunk searched forward, not behind, and touched the female's back leg in a loose circle once, twice. She shifted and started walking. Not fast, just one forward step, then another. Her head turned slightly so one eye could catch his. He followed. Not shoulder to shoulder, not yet, but close. His steps were smaller, his balance unsure, but he was no longer staggering, and he was no longer crawling. Dust curled from beneath their feet, too light to disturb, just enough to mark passage. Two forms moved out from under the shade, hers broad and level, his narrow and cautious, and for a moment their shadows stretched long together, almost one shape, cast toward the open land ahead. The rangers didn't follow. One stood by the emptied pan and brushed dust from its rim. Another folded the canvas in quiet motions, as if noise might wake something they had no right to keep. The third knelt near the rope and watched until the prints faded. No one raised a camera. No one raised a voice. Out on the flats, the pair walked without pause, not fast, not far, but always forward. The female didn't look back. The calf did, once, his ear lifting, trunk pausing mid-air. Then he turned and caught up to her with a little extra effort, a small burst of movement that earned him a low rumble from her chest. He leaned into that sound like a hand under ribs. They walked toward a distant band of acacias, where shade pooled around thick trunks and the day could begin again in a new place. Birds lifted as they passed, grass unbent behind them. No other elephants waited ahead. The journey would be long, but it would be shared now, and that was enough. At the rope line, one ranger pressed his palm to the spot where the calf had first laid his head in the dust days before. The earth was drier now, but warmer. Behind him, the folded canvas swayed slightly from the heat it had carried through the night. "He found her," someone said, low and not needing reply. No one moved for a moment. The prints beyond the rope were already fading. By mid-morning, the clearing was still. Only a few lines remained where hoof met soil. The pan sat empty, but clean. A single strip of cloth lay near the thorn bush, forgotten or perhaps deliberately left, damp with morning, edged in dust. From far away, where the flats curved into green, a shape moved in and out of sight, two bodies pressed by heat haze into one. Nothing dramatic lingered. No marks carved in wood, no collars, no tags, no names to be called. Just a memory of small breaths in the dark, and the knowledge that survival had been passed from one body to another like water poured carefully without waste. The team packed slowly. The truck engine was not started until the air had warmed. They left the rope coiled by the thorn fence, a soft reminder that not all boundaries are meant to hold. In the quiet that followed, only wind moved. It brushed over where the calf had first collapsed, where the mother who wasn't his had found him, and where they had walked out. Not saved, not claimed, but chosen. Two shadows, one path. And behind them, dust settled, gently, as if to hold the space where something had come together and then let go.